Hey everybody, welcome back. It's Professor Jeff here, and today we have an exciting video. Today I'm covering book 4 of Plato's Republic. It's an awesome book. It's an awesome part of the book here. This one is really important because we get Plato's actual definition of justice. Like finally, just spelled out after much deliberation. It is here. So just to go over some things real quick, we will be looking at topics like the importance of happiness in a city and its connection to virtue. The 4 virtues in Plato's perfect city, these are wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. And he's going to argue how those virtues can be instilled in a population. And finally, Plato's definition of justice. Let's go. All right, we are at a pivotal moment in the Republic. It's in Book 4 that Socrates formulates a clear definition of justice, which follows from the discussions of the ideal city so far. Socrates has been discussing what that city would look like with Glaucon and Adeimantus. Remember, these are Plato's real brothers. And in order to view justice in order to understand justice, they're trying to observe what it looks like on a large scale in a city. Okay? So looking at it on that scale helps them to understand what it would look like in an individual. This is ultimately to discern whether or not you should live a just life, right? So the argument starts with someone being like, hey, Socrates, it's actually bad to be a good person because you suffer, you give things up. People who are bad get away with the bad things they do. Why should I try to be a good person? And Socrates answers in true Socratic fashion, saying, like, look, I think justice is good, but, like, what even is justice? What even is justice? Take a moment here. Reply in the comments. What do you think it is? I will wait. Okay. So, previously, the interlocutors have argued fairly convincingly that it's better to be a bad person who deceives others in order to gain a reputation for being a just person. If you do that, you get the benefits of both being a bad person and having the reputation for being a good person, which comes with its own set of benefits. However, Socrates does want to make the claim that a life lived justly is both pleasant in itself and leads to good outcomes. Remember, we discussed like different kinds of good things. There are like things that are good because they're enjoyable. They don't necessarily lead to anything good. There are things that are good because they lead to things that are good, but they're not really enjoyable. And then there are things that are both. Those are the best things. And Socrates thinks being just is one of those things. But before we can get to that, the book opens where we last left off. Now, I'm assuming you've been following this video series from book 1, or that you've read the text yourself, or that best of all possible worlds here, you're reading along with the video series, so you're really up to date, caught up. You know that Socrates has spent a significant amount of time arguing that a special class of people needs to exist to protect the citizens in his ideal republic, both from invaders externally as well as from each other. This class of people is called the guardians, and they must be chosen for their good character and then educated in such a way as to nurture that character and help them be the best versions of themselves. In order to do that, they have to be trained in music and combat, specific kinds of music, right? We talked about all that in detail, I think, in book 3. And their living quarters and their sustenance will be provided for them. They don't like earn it themselves, but they're also not earning it. They essentially get rations, and they're not allowed to become wealthy from what they do. They're not allowed to like earn riches. They're just provided for. So this is important to help understand at the beginning of the book here. Adeimantus asks Socrates for an apology. An apology. This is a loaded word here for Socrates and Plato. So he asks for an apology or an explanation on behalf of the guardian class, who's, by Socrates' argument, the best kind of person in the city, doing the most important work, but also maybe the least compensated, the most restricted in their actions and their ability to thrive in the world. So, look, let's just talk about that term for a sec. It's an allusion to one of Plato's other works, the Apology, which chronicles Socrates' accusation, defense, and ultimately his sentencing to death for corrupting the youth and disrespecting the gods. So Adeimantus is asking for a similar level of explanation about whether or not the guardian class will be happy with their role and compensation for what they're doing. Socrates responds by saying that the happiness of a single class, even if it is a special class, it's also going to be the smallest class, but even if it's special, isn't of the greatest concern. What is important is if the city as a whole is happy, and he believes it will be, given that everyone performs their proper function. So the logic's kind of like this. If everybody is doing the job they want to do, right? They are doing the thing they're meant to do, the thing that they are good at. They will be good at it. They will perform it. They will contribute to society. And in doing so, this will be a major component of both their personal and collective happiness of everybody involved. So Socrates then asks if wealth and poverty actually make someone better or worse at their work, and he concludes that both would make somebody worse. So if you're rich, if you get rich from like making pottery, I think this is the exact example he uses in the text. If you get rich from making pottery, you're not going to be as driven to make pottery, and you're not going to be as motivated to improve and become the best because you're already rich off of what you do. You've already made it. So what are you still striving for? But if you are poor and a potter, you are suffering from a lack of resources and you're not performing optimally. So being either poor or rich makes somebody worse at what they do. This quote from the text says, "Then from both poverty and wealth, the products of the arts are worse and the men themselves are worse." So not just the art, but your personal character degrades in states of poverty and wealth. Y'all think this is true? Comment. Let me know. So this comment applies to both craftsmanship and war. So the guardians have to be kept in a state of what we could think of as optimal deprivation. Again, thinking about this metaphor of the lean dogs of war that they are. Socrates and Adeimantus discuss a few other characteristics of the overall happy city, including ideas such as like the size of the city shouldn't expand beyond its natural limit. Like there's going to be a point that the city expands to based on its commerce and its population, and it shouldn't really push any further than that. He also thinks that kids should be inducted into guardian training based on their ability, not on birthright. So children of guardians aren't necessarily going to become guardians, and children of farmers aren't necessarily locked out of being guardians. He believes proper education will be the guidepost for the development of the young, and music, like the right kinds of music, shapes the souls of individuals and therefore all of society into a healthier mass. Socrates, very big on artistic censorship, we could say. It's something that strikes a lot of people as surprising. So ultimately, Socrates' belief is that if a young person is given proper guidance in their youth, they will grow to make good decisions for themselves and actively make their own lives better. They don't need to be helped by the state. They will be helping themselves and the state as long as They are given the guidance to grow into the best versions of themselves. However, if someone's improperly educated, they will make their lives worse through criminality and indulgence in excessive pleasures. Socrates concludes this part of the discussion by claiming that his city and its inhabitants will embody the virtues of wisdom, courage, justice, or wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice. Okay? This leads Adeimantus back to the central questions of the text. What is justice? And is it good? Socrates is happy to answer, but he wants to start with those first three virtues, right? Wisdom, courage, moderation. So beginning with wisdom, he believes his city will be wise because it rests upon good counsel, okay, good advisement, good people leading. This counsel is it's a kind of knowledge about how inhabitants of the city interact best with each other, and then how different cities will interact with each other. So further, he says that this kind of knowledge or wisdom must be aligned with the natural good. So the guardians make the best form of counsel for the city, since they're charged with overseeing both the internal and the external operations of the city, as well as being raised in accordance with the best possible nature. Right, we're putting all of this effort into the guardians to make sure that they are educated and raised the best possible way. They are our advisors. They know what to do. They're properly aligned with nature, right? So moving along, Adeimantus and Socrates discuss courage. Socrates believes courage is a prolonged preservation of proper discernment. Let's look at a quote to help understand this. He says, "Courage is a certain kind of preservation, the preserving of the opinion by law through education about what sort of thing is terrible, of the right and lawful opinion about what is terrible and what is not." So courage is maintaining your stance through pleasures and pains about what kinds of things are good and what are not. These initial ideas must first be instilled through education in accordance with nature, and then courage is your ability to preserve those opinions and ideals throughout your life. Third is the definition of moderation. Socrates says that moderation is essentially being in control of yourself and your indulgence in pleasure. The psychological aspect of this argument is really the most interesting part, in my opinion, as he argues that there are these two parts of the soul. There's like the inferior part and then the superior part. And the inferior part of the soul or the mind, remember, for the ancient Greeks, it's basically the same thing. It's that invisible force, like within you, the seat of your rationality and your emotions and your desires, right? All this invisible stuff occurring within you. Soul, mind, what have you, same thing here. So the inferior parts of the soul or the mind will want for excessive leisure, food, alcohol, and sex. These are his examples. While the superior part of the soul is guided by calculation, intelligence, and the correct opinions. And whether or not the superior or the inferior part of the soul reigns within a person is to a large part determined by their upbringing and education, according to Socrates. And finally, we get to the good stuff. After over 100 pages of discourse, Socrates actually gives his definition of justice, and that is, ready? Minding one's own business and not being a busybody. This may come as a surprise that this definition is so simple and succinct, yet there are two separate scales on which this idea unfolds. So there's some implications we have to unravel here. So there are the social and the individual scales. Now, I actually have another video where I cover this topic, like really just this little snippet of Book 4 of the Republic. You can check that out in my Philosophy 102 playlist that is tailored specifically for the classes I teach. But within this lecture, there's a lot more context. So, just to begin with the social context in which justice occurs. In this ideal city, right, this is how we're determining what justice is. We're looking at the ideal just city and extrapolating from there. Socrates says there are three distinct classes of people: money-making, auxiliary, and guardian classes. The order here matters too. Okay, as each corresponds to a level of responsibility within that city. Although there is a ruling class, the guardians. However, Socrates believes that justice occurs when each class does the job that is assigned to them, which they do best, based on their nature, and they don't try to meddle among the classes. So guardians must only perform guardian tasks. The auxiliary class must only complete their specific duties. That's like craftsmen, laborers, stuff like that. And the money makers, these are like people who just do trading, must only make money. Each is in their class because it is what they are naturally inclined toward and what makes them the happiest and what they're best at. So the city will be just when each class minds its own business. Further, on an individual scale, which I believe form of the theoretical basis for our modern understanding of psychology, in essence, the definition of justice remains the same. In each part of the whole, minding its own business. But now we're talking about parts of a soul, or a mind, again, and their respective roles. Socrates begins by distinguishing the parts of the inner soul that interact through some examples like a person who is thirsty, but then knows they shouldn't drink dirty water. There's an active, desiring part, your desire for water or for a drink because you're thirsty, that is counteracted by a rational calculation. That dirty water gonna make me sick. And in circumstances when someone's desire outweighs their rational faculty's decision against giving into that desire, he says most people tend to be regretful in those situations. Another specific example he gives is a story he heard of a citizen walking past a pile of corpses near an executioner. This person wanted to look at the bodies, but felt disgusted when he did, demonstrating both the existence of the desiring, right, desire to look, and feeling or spirited parts of the soul. They call it spirited, we'll get to that. Academically, this theory is called the tripartite soul. It's Plato's theory that the soul has three parts: the rational, desiring, and spirited. His individual theory of justice states that a person is just when the three parts of the soul are minding their own business. In this case, the rational part of the soul should rule the other two. He says it should because, and this is a quote, "It is wise and has forethought about all of the soul, and for the spirited part to be obedient and its ally." So having compared a city to an individual and examining the aspects of each, Socrates argues that, and again, quote here, that the city was just because each of the three classes in it minds its own business. And for each of us too, the one within whom each of the parts minds its own business will be just. So everybody's just minding their own business. Classes in the city doing their job, not worrying about what the other classes are doing, not trying to do the job of the other classes. Within the soul, the three different parts are doing what they're supposed to be doing, not interfering with the other. Further, there's always an aspect of like one part ruling over the other as a fixture of a just person. So far as ruling and being ruled are concerned, each of the parts in him minds its own business. Another quote from the text. Finally, there's a natural order to what parts of the soul rule, and a just person is produced by the proper part ruling. And by extension, look, he talks mostly about this stuff with regard to the soul, but by analogy, right, we can infer that there is like a proper ruler of a society that is in some way by nature suited to do that. Where actually there's a complete argument. It's coming later in, I think, book 5 or 6. We will get there soon. But he says, another quote here, "To produce justice is to establish the parts of the soul in a relation of mastering and being mastered by one another that is according to nature, while to produce injustice is to establish a relation of ruling and being ruled by one another that is contrary to nature," which Socrates equates to a kind of health. And this is why being just is a good thing in and of itself. Okay, he argues being virtuous and just is a form of health, and quote again here, "good condition of the soul, and vice, injustice, meddling among the classes, rebellion within the city, a sickness, ugliness, and weakness," concluding that it is better for a person to be just for their own benefit. And that is all for book 4. Let's recap. So, Plato discusses how to assess the happiness of a city and whether or not the guardian's happiness is all that important, or any particular class is all that important. Talks about the 4 virtues: wisdom, courage, moderation, and justice, and how to instill those in a person as well as in a city, and why minding your own business is justice both for an individual and for a city. I will see you next time with book 5. Later.